And then he has to go and fight them off in court to get them to release that. So that way the people who are using his music legitimately
It's almost like
are allowed to do
musical
so.
squatters' rights.
Yes, and they're banking, and they're banking on the fact that that person won't, or that person can't, because they don't have the money to go up against them.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another SGN broadcast. We are the Geeks. And in today's podcast, which was originally going to be another episode of our Two Geeks, One Cup series, we instead found that there was no reason for the cup because there was one topic that was asked about more than any other. And it's worth mentioning that two topics that were fairly popular but not going to be on today's broadcast was one, the Europa Universalis 5 release. I mean, we are, after all, a gaming channel, so that's no surprise. And the other one was the release of the latest expansion for Twilight Imperium, none other than Thunder's Edge. And of course, we recently had a tournament around this. But those are not the topics for today. And before I introduce that topic properly, I have to first do some introductions on who we actually have on this broadcast. First, I am your host, the Sprite Monkey, along with my fellow geek in crime and co-host, the Inner Urge. And today, we actually have a third geek in our midst, and it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce Rockstone, the man, the myth, and the legend behind some of the music that gets played on some of the live streams that we do. The overwhelming ask of the community is around in a completely different topic, and that is Udio and the future of AI music. In one way or another, that is the one request we got. People might have phrased it slightly differently, but that is effectively the topic of the day. And I actually think today, between the three of us, we will be able to give a holistic view or opinion of exactly what we think is happening, both with Udio and the AI music scene, just based on the collective knowledge that we have in the room. So welcome, Inner Urge. Welcome, Rockstone.
Hello.
This is the SGN broadcast for today.
Hello, hello.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's first talk about what happened. Like, for those of you out there who are listening to this who don't know what Udio is, we should probably give a quick introduction as to what that is and also what's happening. So, and feel free to chime in. I know some of you have used this software. I call it software, but it's more of it's an AI music platform. Udio is an AI music platform, and it is effectively allows you to go in, you give it a prompt. It's got a couple of options you can select in terms of how crazy you want it to be, what kind of style of music you're looking for, things like that. And then it would generate a clip of music for you. And then from there, you could compose a song. That's the gist of it. Earlier this year, there was an announcement that they were being sued by a class action lawsuit from UMG, Sony Music, and Warner Music because they used or allegedly used copyrighted material to train their AI models. And they are actually, these three music groups are actually suing Udio and another company called Suno, which is a different flavor of AI music. The last week of October, I believe it was actually on October 29th, there was an important announcement that came out. And while I may get some of my dates and times wrong, I can only tell you how it hit me. So the day after my subscription to Udio renewed, I was given a message that basically said that they were freezing downloads for any music made on their platform. This was for Udio. And that they were partnering with UMG to create a walled garden. So a walled garden is an environment where you can play within it. Think of it like a sandbox, but you can't take anything out of the sandbox. Everything has to stay in there, which meant you would no longer be allowed to post content outside of Udio. You would have to do all of your music creation inside of Udio. And anything that was previously allowed to be given away or it could be commercialized, meaning you can make money from it, would effectively cease. And that Udio would retain the rights to any songs or any creations that you make inside of its environment. And they would also give you 1,000 credits as a thank you to those who had subscribed to the platform. And then they, of course, changed the licensing terms to effectively say that you're not allowed to use anything outside of this platform. And in the future, they plan to, I guess, either replace or enhance. I don't think they're clear on that yet. Udio would become a platform trained exclusively on UMG's catalog. Now, since that initial announcement, and that's how it was read, and the CEO went out and actually gave some public information on that. From all of that information, it was gleaned that this was probably a way of them getting out of the lawsuit with UMG, and UMG promptly dropped their lawsuit. The issues that have since come up are that Udio is not now saying that they are going to be exclusively trained on UMG. It is possible they're going to try to work with the other groups that are suing them. That's Sony Music and Warner Music specifically. There might be others, but those two I remember for sure. But those lawsuits are still ongoing. And the other group that was being sued in parallel with Udio is Suno, and they have so far, as of recording this, have not indicated any interest in following Udio's pathway towards getting out of their lawsuits. So that's where we stand right now in terms of the current situation with Udio. At least that's, again, my perspective on it. Didn't know if, and urge, Rockstone, you had any different opinion or anything that you'd like to add to what's going on right now. I know some of you were actively a part of this. I mean, in the sense that, you were familiar with Udio and had used Udio's services.
Yeah, I used it quite a bit, I would say, over the last year, exclusively to produce my own content. And fortunately, I had stopped paying a subscription for it before any of this kind of went down. But I do find it really interesting that the new terms of service try and claim, okay, so we can use anything you upload to our platform in any way that we see fit, including training our own model. So it's kind of like they're almost asserting a copyright without actually saying that they assert copyright, because you can't copyright AI stuff, which is sort of the whole crux of a lot of this stuff. So I just found that to be a very bemusing kind of aside in their terms of service. It's almost ironic to me.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things I know, at least it's occurred to me, is so if they're moving towards this platform, they're moving to be able to use UMG's catalog, and they want their users to be able to use UMG's catalog. So let's assume for a second that I create a song. Let's say it's based on I'm taking the voice of one of their artists that are already licensed with UMG, and I create something wholly new out of that. Well, who owns the rights to that now? Is it me? I mean, let's say I wrote the lyrics, right? Do I own that, or could that artist just say, "Oh, that was pretty cool. I'm going to own that now, and then I'm going to go sing that in a concert"? And I know another question that's being asked is, "Hey, if I create something within that walled garden, or eventually the UMG licensed content walled garden, whatever they end up creating," which they said what they would do in 2026, by the way, could I then become an artist? Could I then get credit for some of this, or is this just a straight up no? I know that's been a question out there.
Most likely UMG will own it, and you'll get nothing. This is sort of reminiscent of copyright in the early days, when they would get artists who couldn't necessarily write music out on notation, or just didn't want to notate their compositions. In the early days of recording, they used to basically take advantage of a lot of black artists, because they didn't necessarily have like the education to write all the stuff down, but then they would play by ear and do all these great recordings. And so then the studios who did the recordings would have someone transcribe them and then publish them, but they would get the publishing rights. And they would just, word it loosely in the contracts in a way that basically screwed over those musicians. This is a little bit different, like Rockstone was saying. You have to have a human component to claim copyright. That's the thing that kind of came into courts and has a precedence. So there has to sort of be that human element. I think the issue comes into, how do you interpret what AI is doing with currently copyrighted music? So if it takes that as a seed, that you're giving that and you're training the model on it, how much of that is fair use? If I listen to a music genre, like for human beings, it's already been determined legally, you can't copyright a genre of music. You're going to listen and be, influenced by that, and you might even write something that's very similar to something that's already out there. But there's already that precedence that if you write a new melody and you write new lyrics, You can even take the entirety of the chord changes and reuse them over and over and over again. That's fine. So you can't copyright like a style or a method, but you can copyright the actual, melody and lyrics that come out of it. So I think it comes back to like one company owning all of that music that's already out there and produce those recordings. And is it actually a copyright infringement to take those and basically regurgitate them in a clever way with a computer? If they own all the copyrights anyway, they can do it with their AI, probably is what they're banking on. But then they can't really resell that probably without facing the individual artists sort of coming after them. Like, oh, you sold a song that sounds a whole lot like something I composed, right? It's just the wild, wild west right now, honestly, with how AI works and what it's creating.
So that's kind of the piece that I'm very curious about right now. So they say they're going to work with artists within their catalog, and they're trying to figure out, with each individual artist, who's going to contribute their voice or their sound or whatever else. But it kind of feels like what they're almost attempting to do, or the place that it could go, is a giant middle finger to the artists, because, they probably won't own any of the composition copyright or even the master recording copyright, because it's their own voice, but it's been AI enhanced and altered, and they didn't create it, but UMG owns it. So it feels like a really good way to screw them out of even more royalties, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Probably. I would agree with that. But there are precedences of even voice impersonators being sued and winning. Like the precedents, actually have it in front of me here so I can read some of this to be more accurate. There's a precedence in 1988 in Waits versus Frito-Lay. So a singer, Tom Waits, sued Frito-Lay for using a voice impersonator in a radio commercial after he refused to do the ad. So basically they were like, you don't want to do it? Well, fuck you. We'll get a guy that sounds just like you. And he won that lawsuit because his voice was tied to his identity as a songwriter, his identity as a performer. And he did not want his voice associated with that product, and that could hurt his business. And so that's actually a precedent that's been out there. And the same thing recently with Scarlett Johansson. So when she took legal action against OpenAI for basically, she said, I don't want to do this. And then they just made a voice that kind of sounded just like her anyway without her.
Not kind of. It basically was her.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like the precedence is already out there that if they go so far as to sound just like the artist probably has some kind of legal leg to stand on. It's if they sound enough different, then what? Because it's still, again, not a human being creating the thing. So...
Yeah, I'm going to wonder are they going to have some kind of a toggle in the new iteration of Udio where it's, oh, you want to use this artist's voice? Do you want to adjust it? Do you want to change the tone of it? Do you want to maybe even gender swap in some way? I don't know. I don't quite know how they're trying to do it.
Yeah, they have that now.
There's already tools that do that. Like for people who are self-producing and they want to like be the entire choir, you can just sing it in one key or whatever, and you can change your voice and drop it down. So I need a bass, but I'm a girl and I can't sing bass, so I can almost sing bass, but that's another story entirely. But those things are kind of already out there. And then Suno, which was the tool we were talking about the other day, Sprite Monkey, I did a little research on that, and that thing looks cool, but it has all kinds of tools like that where you give it part of a composition. Maybe you play the bass line and say, write me a horn part that sounds like this band's horn section, and it'll do it. So then what about those partial compositions where you're interacting with the product in the same way that a group of musicians would interact with one another, where like a band composes something as a group, right? Bass player comes in and goes, I came up with this cool bass line. Does anyone want to write some lyrics to it? Does somebody want to come up with a cool, interesting way to harmonize this that maybe is, because you can have a bass line and different harmonies. It's not like one chord that goes with any given root note. So how does that work? Because it's partially composed. So then you get even deeper in. I didn't just give it lyrics. I actually gave it parts of a song, and it's just writing a string part or just writing a horn part, but I composed everything else. Or maybe I gave it a whole song and it just performed it for me. Because we have synthesizers that can do that now, but you have to kind of labor intensively either write every note down like you would on a piece of paper, but do it in a computer and it could play that back to you, or you have to play the instruments in yourself, and it can do them with different sounds. So like at what point does that break? Because having it create a sound for you seems reasonable. That makes it an instrument. But what if it's making up its part too?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I know enough about copyright law and where it's going in the U.S. Because I can't speak to other countries because that's the country I'm based in. One of the things that has already come up is that AI, anything generated by AI by itself, is not copyrightable. But they are discussing what is copyrightable. And it means there has to be an element of human input or human creativity, I think is the actual word they use, that makes it copyrightable. What you're effectively copywriting is the human element. And I remember, and the only reason I know this is because I think it was a few months back, I was looking at trying to get a PRO for some of the music that I was creating because I didn't want to get stuck in a copyright infringement issue. And by the way, one of the things I should probably say, just thinking about the group, the three of us here on this call, I mean, I think we've got all the elements of what would have been, I think, the AI industries, or most likely, especially Udio's user base. I mean, we've got a musician, right? We've got a songwriter, and we've got a content creator on here, right? This pretty much covers the basic, everything that I think in the paid realm of what Udio was going for, and ultimately Suno and others are all represented here. And one of the things I remember having to do was I had to look up what if AI music can be sent to BMI or ASCAP. And the answer I got was it used to be no, but this year they changed the rules, and it's actually partially yes, as long as you can justify the human element. And, ultimately in my end, by the way, for what I was using it for, which was, I'm doing it, I'm a content creator, and I'm using it to supplement other works. I'm not trying to sell it as standalone music. And so for me, it didn't make sense to go down that road, but I can imagine others probably would want to go down that road and maybe get credit for some of what they're doing. And the part that I got stuck on was they don't make it very clear as to whether or not lyrics alone are enough for you to register in a partially generated AI song. Like if the melody is generated by AI, but the lyrics are all completely handwritten by a human, does that count? They didn't actually cover that in their requirements, like for what qualifies as covered music versus not. They only talk about like the melodies have to be generated by a human. Like that's what they were mostly focusing on the music side of it.
Well,
and so it was a very gray area. But I know that was my brief run-in with copyright law and kind of where that was going in the music industry, at least. But also it was, at a broader sense, the AI generative AI in general was really more of where that copyright infringement case was based on. It was written on the written side of it, specifically around copyright infringement around written work like books.
So there's a completely different copyright for music versus lyrics. So that's already like a legal thing. So if you want to copyright your lyrics, you have to do it more like you would a literary work, whereas the actual composition of the melody is a completely different type of copyright. So I would think that would carry through. So if you were to separately copyright your lyrics and you were to give them to AI, you have that right to do so. But the problem is if you didn't copyright it, then how can you prove it's yours in retrospect? Yep. So if I think at this point it's going to be like, how careful should the creator be in making sure that everything they give to AI is sewn up? Like, I created a cool whatever. I want to give it to AI to enhance it. You probably should copyright that before you give it to AI.
Well,
like at this point.
Am I not mistaken in that copyright is more or less automatically, like it's not a trademark, right? You have to apply for a trademark, but copyright is, as far as I understood it, automatically
It is
given.
automatic, but the problem is proof. So what they used to tell us to do in music school is when you compose something and you feel like you want to protect it, take a copy of it, put it in an envelope, and mail it to yourself. And then you have a time-stamped thing that's officially government time-stamped in case anyone tries to steal your stuff down the road. Whoever has the first piece of evidence with the earliest date on it will win that court case.
So I feel like
So
you're maybe showing your age a little bit, right? Couldn't you just these days save a file that has a timestamp in the metadata?
you
You can
probably
probably fake
could, but
that.
also you can fake that.
To an
You
extent,
know.
you can fake it, but there's, yeah, that would be a tougher one. I don't know. Mailing something that's a good. I like that idea. I was just kind of musing on whether or not you could
Well, no,
do something
but
a bit
the point
less difficult.
being, the point wasn't the mail part. The
Sure,
point
sure, sure.
was that you have to have something time stamped that would hold up in court as a reputable timestamp to say here's the earliest recorded incident, the earliest recorded like version of this is this. Because you could say all day long, oh, I wrote that, but how can you prove you did it before the guy before you? Because also human beings are really good at coming up with very, very similar ideas.
Yeah.
And so if both of you could prove that completely desperately you've created like the same thing but in two different places at two different times, you could kind of land in a sort of limbo state of, well, you both kind of win. You both can use it. That happens a lot less, but it's a thing that's actually talked about and covered because there are only so many ways you can combine a thing, like so someone could come up with a very similar, if not the same melody, or similar enough that you could say that's definitely a derivative of my work, right? So it all goes back to prove that timeline, and then if you both can prove your timeline and have good evidence, it would go to can one or the other prove that they listened to the other's work, like if those dates are almost the same, to the one who lost, can you prove they listened to the work and it is a derivative of yours if it's slightly different or whatever. AI just throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing of, well, at least the way I see commercials. Like I'll see like a commercial for Sono and like some bass players like, I came up with this cool bass line and I just played it into the computer. Did they record it first, like you're talking about? Like maybe if they made an audio recording of it, and it's got that timestamp, then, they can prove, yeah, I did that beforehand. But a lot of this is just conjecture because it really comes down to like people with money are always going to win. I mean, at the end of the day, the average artist just needs to be careful, I think, when they use these tools that they don't get screwed.
So you saying money makes me want to bring up what I think is an interesting question to ask, which is what is the goal of UMG and Udio with this new agreement that they have? I mean, I think Udio, I'm going to answer sort of my own question there. I think they're just trying to not get sued and stay in business. But is UMG actually trying to get into the AI space and have this platform that lets people make music, quote, based on their own artists and library? And is that how they're planning to make money with people releasing that content? Or are they planning on people paying the subscription and making money that way? Or, and this is my own personal take on it, are they trying to actually kill the platform entirely by restricting what you can even do with the music that you produce on there, and they say it's theirs by virtue of the contract and they can use it however they want, but all you can do is listen to it. Who would want to actually pay for that?
I think it's a little bit of both. Well, at least two of those. This is my opinion. And a lot of this is going to be if I was in the position of the CEO who runs that company, how would I have dealt with the situation I was given? It's going to be a lot of that. As well as if I was in UMG's shoes, what would I want to see out of it? Now, UMG, this is me using my memory and not necessarily facts, right? Because I don't have it in front of me. I do believe UMG did attempt to create or have a AI platform trained on its library, and I don't think it worked out well. And that it I guess to some degree it makes sense that UMG then would want a partner that actually did have a successful platform to come in and do it for them the right way. That's maybe the UMG perspective. But I think from the UMG's perspective, it goes even further. And for that, before I get into that point of it, so, I there was a post made by the CEO of Udio, and the way I read it, the tone was essentially, look, we're a small company. There's no way we could fight these guys in court over the duration and with the amount of money they're asking. And so my hands were tied. And so I had no choice. And so I had to basically bow out of this. And that was the message he was kind of portraying. Again, I am extrapolating my opinion based on what I was reading. And as a result, he, I think Udio just did not see a path. I think they felt like they were going to lose, and they were going to lose in a big way. And as a result of that, he had no choice. Because if you read the way he kind of phrased it was, it is not, I have zero interest in forcing downloads to stop. Right. But the way he came off is my hands are tied. I have to do this. Otherwise they won't agree to a settlement with me. That's, like you do in any corporate environment, you got to put a positive spin on anything that happens, because if he went out there and basically said this deal is bullshit, and I didn't want to have any part of it, but my hands were tied. If he literally said that, UMG would absolutely bow out of the agreement the next day, because they don't want that kind of negative press. Now, what most likely happened behind closed doors, by the way, for anyone who's been in like a litigation like this ever, what most likely happened is UMG probably knows their case is 50-50. Udio is probably going to, maybe made the same call and said it's maybe 50-50, but just relaying personal experience here, most likely UMG just came to the table and said, look, I have to tell you something, that we've actually decided that we're going to find a partner to help us with our AI program. And, you can either agree to do this now or we're going to pick somebody else, right? And we've already talking to a couple of other partners, and I'll tell you soon, it was probably on the table, is what they told him. And, it puts a false sense of urgency that they need to do something immediately, especially if you come out and say, like, once one of these groups sign, and we're very close to signing with somebody else, then we're not going to make you an offer, and you're going to have to go all the way to the end on this one. And if you were on the receiving end of a message like that, how would you react to it? And most likely, he reacted and said, okay, well, I have to be first then, because it's my only way out, and took the option. And then now we're kind of seeing what the fallout of that option looks like. That's what again, personal experience, having been in similar situations, not in this industry, obviously, but I've seen those kinds of things happen. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's exactly what happened in this case as well. But the part that strikes me the most is, and this is for anybody listening to this podcast, I want you to imagine for a second, what is the greatest thing you've ever created in your life? Did you build a car did you build a hot rod? Did you build something in your backyard? Did you build a music library? Whatever it is, at whatever level, something that was important to you, that's really, you would define as maybe your life's work. And now imagine that somebody just came in there and just started ripping it apart. And how would you react if someone did that to your creation, right? Are you going to sit there and you're going to fight them off? Or are you just going to sit in the back and be like, well, that makes me sad, and just let it happen? And I can't imagine if this was this guy's life's work, that he had created this thing that a lot of people out there are using, and it was successful. And he looked at it and said, UMG is tearing it apart, but it's fine. I'm going to let it happen. I'm not going to fight to the end. I'm not going to go to the courts. I'm not going to fight this all the way until I get a judgment from the court that says that I have to take this down and go through all the appeals processes and years of this. Mm-hmm. What ultimately happened is he looked at his hand and said, I got a wad of money. This was my life's work. And he took it. Because a lot of the creators here, including myself, by the way, my automatic resub happened the day before the announcement. And I'm like, how could you do that with no warning whatsoever to the people who are using your platform? I mean, that in my mind is the only way out of a situation like that. And is to basically say, I was afraid I would lose the money and the product, the thing that I had created. And I had to keep at least one of them. And I chose to keep the one I knew I could keep. And that's what's happening. And now what's happening, though, is anywhere that Udio goes, or anybody associated with Udio, they have created a cult following, and not in a good way, of people who will just review bomb and just blow up anything you try to create going forward, because these people aren't happy. I mean, I'm not going to be one of them because I've got priorities I need to focus on, but you read the Reddit posts, you just read the general vibe in the community right now. Udio and anybody associated with Udio right now is definitely a blacklisted person.
See,
And
that's why
I think UMG is going to have this problem if they ultimately want to go down this road. I don't think this platform they're thinking about creating is going to work.
Honestly, that's kind of why I don't really subscribe to your perspective on things, unless I make the assumption that the CEO is an idiot, and he could be. Because any kind of decision like this, where you basically take this cool platform that you have that does this really cool thing that people have been enjoying and using, and completely 180 and tear it away from people day of your announcement, even before you've announced they can't do this thing anymore, and you kind of ruin the whole purpose of your platform, what do you think is going to happen? You talk about him trying to save his business, this baby, this thing that he created, right? But that's not what's going to happen. That's not what is happening. People are unsubscribing. People are leaving. People are review bombing. So, and it's not like that's an unforeseeable outcome. That's very, 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 very predictable.
I think it's so. The seeking of damages was $150,000 per song used to train the
That's so
AI
stupid.
model. That's a ridiculous amount of money. So, my husband and I own a club, and there's a thing in copyright historically has this weird precedence of bullying. So, like these publishing agencies like ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, and they can basically just come to you and say, you owe us money if you have a stage and a piano because you might play one of our tunes. And that is legal. That is their precedent. And you can try to fight them, but they will, say, well, we're just going to sue you and we have millions of dollars. And some people just cave to that. And if you know you're playing a lot of their tunes, you really should just pay them. I mean, the artists probably aren't going to see very much of that money. My husband sees a $20 check every 3 or 4 years from BMI for any tunes that he has ever written and been used. But they don't have any way of tracking it, right? In the modern world, we could probably track it, but up until recently, there wasn't a good way to prove one way or the other, did they play a tune that was copyrighted? So on the mere chance that you might, they can come and tell you, pay me like $1,000 every 3 months. Right now, we pay ASCAP and BMI, but CSAC keeps coming and saying, you owe us $1,200 for this. And we don't even play songs from their catalog. But legally, if they chose to sue us, we would probably lose because the legal precedence is you might play a song from their catalog, and it's about the might. So it's like a reverse thing to every other law, guilty until proven innocent, right? And so the burden of proof is so great. You would have to prove that you wrote down every single song ever played in your venue, on not just on your stage, but on your radio or your record player or anything that comes out, you have to pay for that. So those blanket licenses are just a form of bullying. So if you attach a price to something and you have a bigger company and you say, we're just going to basically bury you if you don't do this, a lot of small businesses will just cave. And so to me, this seems like one of those big companies bullying the smaller company. And in their mind, they're probably thinking, it's probably what you were saying, Sprite Monkey, where it's like, we're going to sue you, but you could always just sell yourself to us, and then you don't have to worry about it. You get money, and we don't take down your product and take you into court and totally decimate your life's work. I think there is a little bit of that fear, and maybe instead of the owner caving for fear, he's just like, fine, I'm just going to do this. Basically, I think my users are just going to flip you the bird anyway. I think maybe it could be more vindictive, somewhere in between you guys. The owner of it's like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't win this lawsuit. So let them have the thing. And I don't think that my audience is even going to follow along. He doesn't want to be involved in the legal snafu that's going to surely fall out with this. Whereas Suno's investors seem to not care as much, maybe. They've got a little bit of money to back them. And they're like, well, prove it. make your case, and maybe we win, maybe we lose.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see if Suno sees what happened with Udio and makes the decision to cave as well. I mean, right now it doesn't appear to be that way, or if they are going to continue to fight it out. I mean, last I heard, they're still getting additional, equity in their business to actually. I mean, I think they're the largest one now. I can't remember the exact number. I think someone said they're up to $2 billion in equity. That's larger than Udio. So, I mean, maybe they do have the opportunity to do it. I mean, why would you ever invest in a company that you think is about to get sued into bankruptcy? I think the one of the most tragic things that's coming out of this whole thing is, with the lawsuits moving forward in the courts, it means that we are moving closer to actually getting a definition of what is considered copyright infringement and what's not considered copyright infringement in the AI space in general, but definitely in AI music. And this is a setback towards that ultimate goal, because now one's settled. So now we still don't know the answer. And so it's going to continue to be an unknown until we have another, case that continues to move through it. And if Suno sells out too, we have to wait even longer. And that's just going to leave this question mark over the entire industry that could potentially not get solved for a very long time. I mean, we're probably already talking years before something like this gets pushed up high enough to the Supreme Court has to make a call on it. And that's just assuming Suno, again, years if Suno stays in. If Suno bows out for some reason, even longer, because you got to start the whole process over again.
Well,
and
I think
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it benefits companies like UMG to have it be in this gray area and this big unknown, because they can do then exactly what you were talking about in our urge with, well, we're just gonna sue you because there's kind of this precedent set, and we're gonna bully you. And sure, no one quite knows the definition or is really sure what the rules actually are, but everyone just settles with us because that's just what everyone else has done, and we have more money than you, so fuck off. So it feels like they wouldn't want it to become settled law, because then there would be rules that others could actually follow to avoid their bullshit.
Yeah, one of the reasons why most of the music licensing agencies can do what they do is because the smaller individual users of their, catalogs don't have the wherewithal to create a class action lawsuit to try to actually change anything about it. Because it would take a massive effort to get enough small guys together to say, the world's different now. We could actually, we could use modern tooling to prove that, we didn't we only used these songs, so we should only have to pay for these songs. And then the artists would actually be able to say, oh, well, ASCAP, you owe me more money than you said you owe me. So it's this similar situation of, it behooves those agencies that quote unquote protect copyright to have these laws be so blanketed that they just it's like insurance companies. They're just making money off the chance that you might get sick, thousands of dollars a month we pay to them. And, you go to get a flu shot at Kroger and they tell you can't get one. It's like, what did the $1,000 I paid last month pay for then? It's the same sort of thing, just with music. So you just got big guys with money bullying small guys without it. And it's that same song and dance over and over again. And I think it's going to take big artists that have more weight, in the universe. Their fan base is so big and they have money of their own, that they can fight against this sort of thing. Like artists who, for instance, there's a different copyright for a recording, so a mechanical copy versus an actual composition, like when you write it. So some recording artists will re-record their music to get around like bad deals they made when they were young.
Yep.
Like, I didn't know I had to look out for this thing. So now that I have power, I can go back and re-record these songs and tell all my fan base, stop buying the old copies. I'm getting screwed in the pooch. Buy the new copies. And, it takes that kind of power to change these sort of things. So I think it goes back to, like the Scarlett Johansson thing, where you have to be big enough to actually get in the news and make some waves, whereas the owners of these small startups aren't those people. They're just little guys in the grand scheme of things. And they're just getting bullied. And it is a weird thing. Like, even as an artist, I don't know how to feel about some of the stuff that AI can do. Like, yeah, it could prevent me from making money in XYZ venture, but then you have to like weigh that against you using the tool yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If I look at it just purely as a tool, I'm like, oh, bring it on. Give us all the cool technology. Let's do it. But then if you're like, well, if all the fringe people just stop paying whatever kind of artist to do a thing, that's a significant amount of money to people who don't make that much money to start with anyway. And so the only people making more money are, of course, the rich people. So
Yep.
it's kind of depressing when you think about it too much.
Let me ask you this in a different way then. So do you consider people who make music in AI artists? And if so, like, would they be a part of that, small group, the lower echelon of that artists group that is basically getting screwed over the big guys?
Well, I mean, it's the same answer I would give to somebody who said to me, do you think people who compose country music songs are composers or something like that? I mean, there's no genre that defines you as an artist. There's no tool that defines you as an artist. And everybody's definition for what makes an artist is so different. I think there is an amount of contribution minimally that you could call something yours. If I toss AI 2 sentences and it creates 30 minutes worth of content out of that, I don't really think that I was very creative. And I wouldn't personally claim that as my creation. Now, if I wrote an entire short story where I created the bulk of like I wrote an outline, I wrote, 80-90% of the text, and I used the AI to help me enhance it or to help me proofread it or to shoot spitball ideas with until I came up with one that I wanted to pursue, I would call that the use of a tool, and therefore I would still consider myself the creator. And so then if I would extend what I would do for myself, to everyone else, which is kind of how I'm wired, I would say there's definitely a dividing line of when AI just does some crazy magic stuff and you're like, that was cool, but that's not really me being an artist, or that's not really that person being an artist, versus actually taking some effort and leveraging it as a tool. And there's going to be a huge amount of gray area in the middle of it's pretty obvious to everybody someone didn't create that the tool did the whole job. It's like I sat down to play a piano and I worked the pedals. I must be a great pianist. Versus, I actually instructed AI in a lot of careful ways to help me, build a better whatever.
Mm-hmm. Your last comment there is pretty funny. My mom used to have a phrase where she'd say, "As long as you took a dish out of the oven, then you baked it." That was as much effort as you had to put in to be considered a baker. That was more of a joke. But
Yeah.
Do you mind if I, Sprite Monkey and Inurge, do you mind if I give my own answer to that question that you posed?
Yep, please do.
Go for it.
So I'll kind of relate it specifically to Udio as a tool, since that's the one that I've used. And I think that it's going to be an entire spectrum, right? You're going to have people who come into the tool and they don't even want to write a single line, a single lyric. They'll just say, give me a song about the sun and stars. And that's as far as their contribution goes. And they'll do the generation. It'll give them the 30-second clips. And they'll say, okay, this one sounds good. Extend it. And just keep doing that. Just hitting extend, not fussing with any of the other settings, and just kind of letting it fly. Versus, and this is the category that I would put myself into, someone who treats it more like how Inner Urge was describing, where it's more of a tool as part of the process, right? I don't consider myself by any means a composer. I can't write music. I can hardly play the guitar, but I do know it sounds good, and I do know how to write some lines, and I do understand kind of the concept of the intro and how things build and leading into a chorus. Uh, and using a tool like Udio, you can't just, if you want something of quality, you can't just say generate, click generate. You have to iterate and create a whole bunch of samples, find the one that you like, add on the next bit, maybe adding in a new line or tweaking the phrasing so that it sounds better. Trying to get the actual sound and vibe that you're going for, even if it's not quite what you expected from the start, so that there can be this entirely creative aspect to the whole process. Even though I'm not the one playing the instruments, I'm not the one singing the melody, I am still crafting the experience based on what my personal taste is, based on what I've written lyrically. And so, in that context, that's absolutely an artist. That is someone who has made a thing, right? It's at that point, and I definitely wouldn't, try and claim copyright to any of it, but in my mind, that's as close as it gets to a copyrighted AI work. Is I've used it as a tool now. I might as well have spent my monthly subscription on, hiring artists to perform the piece for me in some way. I don't know about that
Yeah.
last bit, but anyway, that's kind of where my take on it is.
And
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, to me, having worked for years in the music industry, there are different kinds of contribution that you can make, and they're not all composer. Like, they're in bands will oftentimes group compose and group arrange things, but only one band member will get like the the title of composer or something like that. I mean that, and
Hmm.
then the band breaks up and there are whole lawsuits about that kind of stuff too. But also there's just like a concept of being an arranger. Like there are all kinds of people out there whose entire job it is to take a song that already exists and orchestrate it or arrange it in a different way or to mix it together with a different thing. Um, it took me a long time to want to consider some mixing like in traditional like R&B as actual creativity because they weren't playing an instrument. But I feel differently about that now because I've heard some really interesting ways people have recombined things that already exist. But to my mind, that's a different thing. Like there will be a term one day for the thing that Rockstone was describing where a person hones in with AI, a thing. And maybe it'll continue to be called some kind of composition, or maybe we'll make up a new word for it entirely. But I do think that is creative because you're right. Like the flow of the tune, AI still doesn't have a clue really about that. Like if you keep just hitting generate, it does some really weird stuff. Sometimes it's interesting. Like the cool thing about it is, for me as a creator, it'll do something that I don't think any human would dare do. And sometimes it's really cool and it's brilliant. And I'm like, I don't think a human would have ever thought to go there because so much music doesn't go there.
Right, and even that is just the one out of 30, like 30
Yeah,
Cherwell compositions versus the one that somehow the stars aligned.
right. And then also to use it as a compositional aid, where does that fall? So let's say back to the whole question of, okay, I paid my subscription and I'm just trying to come up with a different way to ideate as a composer. So I use, a tool like this to create an outline of an entire song. It's not perfect, but it's like 80% of what I want. And then I take that away and I go to my band and I say, this is a demo I created with AI that really expresses the thing I wanted to express because maybe I don't write music, right? I do, but the person maybe doesn't write music, right? Or they don't play all the instruments, or they struggle to describe to the drummer exactly the beat that they want, right? And that's the thing that happens to musicians all the time that aren't classically trained or don't have schooling, or even people with schooling sometimes struggle to describe a certain thing that's in their head and get it out on paper because maybe it's complex. And for some reason they get something super similar by describing it to AI somehow. And they can just take it and be like, can we grow this? Can we make it into something our own? Who owns that? Because you've used all these generated things from AI, but then you went out and composed your own tune using it as a model, and now you're a human doing it. You have your own band play it and record it. Who owns that? Like, that's an even crazier thing that's going to happen out of this, because I know the musicians I know that are using AI, that's how they're using it. They don't necessarily have, the ability to get with their friends every single day and ideate. So now they can just use the computer to do that in this almost human-like way. But then they take it to their band, or they take it into a composition tool like, Finale or something like that, and actually write a composition based on it. Do they truly own that composition? Because it is not illegal for a person to be inspired by and use parts of any genre that's out there. There's so much weird gray area that comes out of this whole question of, beyond just a creator wanting a quick way that, Sprite Monkey needs 30 seconds of background music for something that he's working on for a podcast. He doesn't have the budget, and he would never go out and hire somebody to do it because of that. This was a convenient, beautiful tool to be able to get something that he didn't need that copyright for. Now he does. Now he's might, have his stuff taken down or muted or whatever. Beyond that usage, like, what happens when it's just a creative tool? Could someone hearing that song, say it becomes a hit? Is, Udio going to come along, UMG is going to come along and say, that sounds just like this thing that got generated on our platform. I bet you we own that.
You can see them doing that, actually. That's the scary part. Because, we know that AI music has actually performed well and has hit the charts. So, and
they're going to win the timestamp thing too. Like, if we go back to that precedence of, can you prove it's a derivative work, and do you have a timestamp to prove it? Then.
And I fully agree with you. And you did mention the content creator part of it too. There's a whole thing where I use human created content when I can, but it is a struggle. And by the way, it's not a struggle because of the artists. Actually, I prefer to work directly with the artists who make some of the music. It's the corporations that kind of sit up there on top of it and make it excruciatingly painful, to the point where when AI music came around and all of a sudden I had a method that wasn't going to copyright strike my work, and I didn't have any fear of that, and it wasn't going to extort me for money just because I had used it in the background of my videos, and it was like totally cool with me, like, pay $10, create anything you need exactly to the detail you need. It was fantastic. And yeah, I absolutely jumped on that as fast as possible, because it took my creative, I could probably make a whole podcast on what it's like to do like creative video editing and everything. It goes from taking hundreds of hours to source music, talk to the artists who made it, beg them for the rights to do it, figure out what their fees are or any of that kind of stuff. And a lot of them I use don't even require fees. Like, I use Creative Commons libraries a lot, but even those are dangerous to use, because a lot of people, because of the way like YouTube and others, the way they operate copyright infringement and the way that you can do takedown on videos, there's like, they're there to protect themselves. They're not there to protect the artists. I'll just say that up front. But there are bad actors in that group now where you can't even trust what you're getting there. And so hundreds of hours sourcing this for maybe a 5-minute video or 5-minute string of where I need music to be playing in the background to make a scene work out. I'd have none of that with AI. It took 100 hours process, and I could condense it down to maybe 10. And all of a sudden, it was doable, right? It suddenly made the act of trying to get all of that content created successfully. And that's, to me, like you guys have been saying, I used it as a tool. And I wasn't one of the ones that just like create a song, gave it some, maybe a sentence or something, and just said go at it, and then it created me something. No, I was in the weeds, making those creative decisions as I went along, because I had a specific narrative I was going for. Or in most cases, I write all my own lyrics for my own songs. And so I needed that to fit into the exact timestamps in the videos I was trying to make, right? Things like that. So there's a lot of this that went into it, but it's stuff I couldn't have even dreamed to do if it wasn't even available as a tool to me. But as I kind of went through it, and as I saw kind of the narrative switching on AI's creative usage and things like that. And by the way, I should just say for the record, like I've never tried to create a known vocalist's voice. I'm not trying to recreate someone else's thing. I'm trying to make my own stuff in my own style. But to that end, as I saw where the narrative was going with the copyright infringement stuff, and then of course now with the Udio thing partnering with UMG, I've always looked at this as like, what's the difference between an AI tool and like a synthesizer? I mean, a synthesizer is not a quote unquote real instrument. It's imitating an instrument in the same way that AI music is doing the same thing, right? And why do we view one differently than the other? I would say, okay, is AI easier to use? Yes. But I would say anybody who's been working with a synthesizer or even an auto tuner might be another one. Like that's not someone's real voice. That's a computer changing the pitch of someone's voice to match what their ideal output would be, right? Those, if you've been using those a lot and you're familiar with those tools, that's probably as easy for you to use as it would be to use an AI, in my opinion. And I'm saying that,
Right.
But
I know plenty of musicians that would argue the point that if you've got to use an auto tuner to be in tune, you shouldn't be allowed to be a musician. But like that's a really harsh viewpoint. I mean, that's a whole other topic. Like, is chasing perfection like in that way, like that is again companies trying to make more money off of someone who looks good. They're thinking about a product. So there's two things here. As an artist, I want to do something that's authentic. I mean, that's my own personal, preference, right? You got a big company, they want to make money. Everybody kind of wants to make money, but I think artists that really care about creation want to make something that's like a reflection of themselves in that moment that they're creating a thing, right? Whereas like record companies just want to take someone sexy and put it with something that sounds good. Milli Vanilli, like take that as an example. Those two boys got completely screwed over by the industry. They looked beautiful. They could barely speak English. They found a band that sounded great and had voices that looked like they could match those two guys, and they put them together. And they told them, if you lie and say anything, you guys will be the one who take the fallout. And when the fallout finally came, they did. The music industry is wrought with stories like this where that end product that someone's going for, is that art or not? The fact that the way you think it got created doesn't match up with the actual creation of it. Does it ruin it as art for you? Like if someone found out that a song you used AI to create it, it might invalidate that to some listener as being art at all, even though they enjoyed the song greatly before they found out that AI was involved. That's going to be a whole other category of argument that I think will happen, as time goes forward. Like, is it art if you create it with AI? That's a much harder question to answer because you can't hardly define art anyway. Like, somebody's going to come along and say anything.
If you look back in time, you'll see that argument happens over and over and over again.
Oh yeah, sure. With every tooling that ever came up, through the history of time.
How about the first time that recordings became a thing?
Yeah, for sure. And then people could copy that sound, before recorded music, musicians, like street musicians in New Orleans used to just like put like stuff over their hands to hide their fingerings because they weren't always schooled musicians. And so sometimes the fact that they were using non-conventional fingerings would give them a sound that was unique to them. And so people would try to steal their technique, and so they would cover their hand to try to get past that. And then with the advent of recording, somebody could just listen to it long enough that even if they used a different technique, they could mimic the sound. So if you sound, if you make your trumpet playing sound just like some other guy's trumpet playing, how does that affect how the world perceives you as an artist? I mean, because there is a degree of learning from other artists to begin with. That's how we learn to talk. That's how we learn to walk. We're creatures that look and recreate by our very, very nature. But at what point do we consider it copying versus our own thing. This is not a new thing. It's just AI is moving so fast. I just don't know how legislation is going to keep up,
Yep.
honestly.
Yeah, to your point about being trained, I think one of the first whole songs I learned to play was "Ode the Joy."
Yeah. And just the idea of like what can be copyrighted too. Like two orchestras can play the exact same Beethoven arrangement in exactly the same way, almost to the letter, and the two recordings are copyright. They're completely a different copyright than the act of playing the tune, which is the equivalent of open source because it's past being
Yep.
able to be copyrighted. So, it'll be interesting to see how it falls out. But like everything, I think the people with the money will just end up controlling it.
You know, the interesting thing on the business perspective of you could argue that maybe the reason why there's lawsuits to Suno and Udio is because they're making the most money from it. But as a user, right? I'm not again the way I'm using it. It was actually my method of having a profitable way of doing it myself too. Like to give you an example of what it's like, right? To source the music from a human. Like at one point in time, I was quoted. I'm not gonna tell you the song, but it was $700 one-time use on a song, and for one, this is not my life's work, so I'm not gonna pay that kind of money. Not gonna lose that kind of money on a deal like that. But even if it was, my job, why would I do that, right? Like that was the problem that I had, and you never knew what the other person was going to ask or any of that kind of stuff. So it wasn't feasible for me to do what I felt was the right thing and pay the people whose music I want to use in my videos. And now you could argue that there's companies that are using AI to make a profit, but in return for what I knew to be a solid flat fee of $10 a month from Udio specifically, I'm talking about Udio's subscription fee. I could generate enough tracks exactly the way I needed them, and I knew that I could, I knew where I was going to end up in terms of if I was even going to break even. But even if I wasn't going to break even, losing $5 on a passion project certainly was more palatable than losing $600. So I would say I even managed to net out a positive in this in terms of how much investment I was going to have to spend in, again, a hobby, which was making these creative videos. And the company has made money from it, sure, but I felt like I was winning, which is why I bought the subscription in the first place. So to some degree, I think it was sort of they paid it forward a little bit in this case. And by the way, I don't mean to paint all music creators in a bad light. That was one specific example that happened to me. But it's hard because some of the people I ended up sourcing music from on a regular basis, because once you do this long enough, you eventually get kind of your trusted list of people that are legit, trustable sources, that they're not going to try to sue you or put copyright claims on your videos after you post them just because they know you did it, right? And to make your life harder in that case. And even them, I remember I would watch videos where they were getting screwed over by people who were stealing their copyright, and it was frustrating on their end. And I'm just like, the whole system is just broken all the way through. And because they shouldn't have to do that. If they created it, why are they fighting some corporate or some corporation that came in there and said, oh, you didn't fingerprint your video or you didn't fingerprint your music, so I now own your fingerprint, and now everybody who uses your music has to pay me now. And then he has to go and fight them off in court to get them to release that. So that way the people who are using his music legitimately
It's almost like
are allowed to do so.
musical
Yes, and
squatters'
they're
rights.
banking. Yeah, and they're banking on the fact that that person won't, or that person can't, because they don't have the money to go up against them.
Right.
And even if the person who steals it doesn't have a lot of money, how hard is it to like run down a digital identity anyway? Like to actually talk to a real, who do I sue? Even finding that kind of stuff out is such a taxing exercise that you're going to spend the hours beyond the amount of money you've lost. And so nobody's going to want to do it. And
Right.
everybody's banking on that fact. And it's pretty disgusting. And especially when you come from software development where open source I feel like every time I work in software with open source, I'm like, how did these guys figure it out? They have tiers, of like, oh, if you're an individual and your team is no bigger than 3 people, have at it. MIT our software. I hope you make it big so that you can pay us more money later. But if you don't, love you, enjoy using our code, maybe buy me a coffee sometime, and that's it. And then if you have a kind of a medium-sized company, you can pay a reasonable amount of money to use that open source software. That's a lot less than trying to pay a developer to reinvent the wheel. And then if you have a giant corporation, you have a completely different enterprise style license to use that open source software that fits the budget of an enterprise.
Yeah.
And because, I don't know, maybe it's that, by the time software open source development came along, they'd seen all of the atrocities and other forms of copyright, and they're like, let's just not get into that, guys. Or if they just, I don't know how it ended up that way. But I'm always looking at it like, why? If, having come from the music background of being taught to be so defensive of your copyright, but then also understanding in the back of your head that you're probably just going to get screwed out because you're the little man, and the chances of you ever making it big enough to stick it to the man are next to zero. Versus like, I don't know, open source is a community that I am happy to participate in. And if I come up with an idea, I wouldn't feel weird at all about opening it up and letting people borrow it, use it, make money from it, because when small guys help out other small guys, it usually turns out pretty nice. These software developers that are now getting into this music scene are probably like, what the hell did I just get myself into? I'm sure, like, because tech has always been more open like that. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh crap, my technology is getting into this industry that is very aggressive about like creative content and how to make money off of it. And it's always been people who aren't actually the creators benefiting from that. I mean, it's like a good idea by creators gone very, very wrong. Like I want to protect myself, but I need help to do it. And so they create companies to do that. But then the companies are the only ones making the money. Like every guy that calls up and harasses me from CSAC about how we need to pay them $1,000 every 3 months for not playing their tunes in our club makes more money than I'm ever going to make off of tunes being played in my club, like that sort of, and the artists in their book, unless they're the Beatles, they're not making very much money either. Those companies, by virtue of just saying, we'll help you out, we'll protect you, they're practically the mafia.
Yeah. It's just a completely different world in terms of the experiences. And you're right about software development. I mean, dude, back in the day, I think we all at one point in time have probably posted some code live or to the public that is basically GNU license.
Yeah, I mean, I use open source all the time, both in play and at actual paid jobs. And, like 99% of the time, the licenses are extremely reasonable, like, and they're thought out that way. Like a bunch of nerds sat around and thought about it, like I don't want to screw over some other, individual nerd. And also there's this whole idea, I mean, React's a great example of this. So Facebook is how do I get a bunch of developers trained on the thing that I need them trained on without having to train them? Well, I'm going to open source React. And it becomes very popular. And then, Facebook has, the vast majority of front end developers pre-trained to work at their company on their platform because they made it open source. So there's reasons for big companies to open source. There's reason for small people to open source, and building off of it just helps us build faster and stronger. And there's still billions of dollars to be made.
So I know the comparison has been made that, well, Udio being the topic, right? But really, I'd say AI music or the platforms that make the AI music being compared as a tool similar to what Adobe is to the artistic industry. I mean, as in drawing digital art. Thoughts? Is it the same thing?
Well, I mean, I think at sort of the bird's eye view, yes, it's the same thing, right? Because they're both tools being used by people to create something. But as soon as you zoom in, I think it kind of loses that context. For example, with Adobe, you have the brush tool and the pen tool, but no one is really going around claiming like, oh man, I've got the best brush tool. You should see the way that I've implemented it, and it's this new thing that's going to just take over the world. Versus on the music side of things, you do have these kind of individual people who have like a unique voice or a way of playing guitar, and it becomes popular enough that other people start doing it with their stuff, and that's what, say, Udio uses to train their model, right? Like the actual tool itself comes from something. It's not a collection of tools. It is a tool that is this amalgamation of data sets from a bunch of probably previously copyrighted work and material. So it is a tool, but when you zoom in, it's kind of murky. I'm not even sure I would call it gray of how did you even create that thing? How did you even
What
create the
about
thing that then lets you create something else?
what about something like Firefly though? Because you can go into Adobe and prompt generate an entire file, or you can go into, I mean, Photoshop or into like Illustrator. I've done this before to create like quick posters, for stuff where I don't have any, no one's given me anything to use, and I'm like, give me 5 old people dancing to a jazz band, and I'll do it like as a drawing, as a line art. When I do that though, I'm using almost entirely generative AI, but Adobe's not trying to sue me. But of course, the Adobe's a mono. It's the opposite thing. This is like $1 billion company just doing what it wants. Who's going to be the person that comes along and says, "Hey, I made a drawing kind of like that at one point. I'm going to sue Adobe." So it's
Right.
sort of a reversal of the power play here, where Adobe can train it on famous artists all day long to generate stuff, but do any of those artists have enough money to sue Adobe? No.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel like what you're describing there is exactly where UMG is trying to take a service like Udio, where it's
Hmm.
uh, Adobe doesn't have to worry about suing anyone because literally everyone is using Adobe's tools already because they're so monolithic and
Yeah.
they're so ubiquitous in the space. You look at their subscription fees, it's absurd the amount of money they charge, like $50, $60 per month just to have the satisfaction of installing software that you still don't even own because that's a per month basis. That
Yeah.
I feel like that's exactly where UMG is trying to go with this whole thing, and I don't know. To me, that's not a. I suppose it is an apt comparison, but it's not the kind of dystopian future I'd like to be a part of.
There's also the thing too in music where you actually have artists who have all basically signed up for whatever reason Kool-Aid we drank and told we should do it, and now it's not necessarily protecting us as individuals, but it gives these monolithic corporations a mechanism to earn money off of us,
Hmm.
whereas individual artists and other forms of art like drawing or whatever, there's not an equivalent of ASCAP and BMI to people who draw things. Like, oh, I'm just going to go protect my art with this copyright agency that's going to go out and look at drawings all over the universe and say, if you have an art board, you might hang up one of my drawings, so you owe me $500 a month. Like
Yeah,
there's no equivalent to that.
I think the
So,
closest. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were done.
no,
Continue.
no, go ahead.
All I was going to say is the closest that comes to it that I can think of would be the major comic book companies, right? Like DC or
Oh,
Marvel.
yeah.
That's kind of the holy grail for a lot of artists is can I get my art into a comic book? But then even if they invent a character that becomes super famous, right? Like this was the whole issue with Stan Lee for a long time was he didn't actually own Spider-Man. He didn't actually own the Fantastic Four, and so it's that copyright issue of who owns the rights to some of this stuff. Um,
Hmm.
and even when Batman was created, right, for the longest time, it was just claimed that, oh, Bob Kane is the guy who created Batman. And DC went along with it for whatever reason. And it took years and years, decades almost of litigation and of course, I can't remember the second person who also co-created Batman, but like now he gets a byline and a credit in the movies and stuff because
Hmm.
he also did help create it. But yeah, I guess it's kind of a tangent, but it's the only kind of similar equivalency that I can think of on the artistic side with drawing and stuff.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about stuff like that is I always wonder, you go to a convention and there are so many artists who are there selling a drawing of some character from a comic book or a character from a movie or a TV series, and you know they haven't gone and asked permission, and they're making money off of it. Like, but because it probably helps the overall marketing of those things, they kind of just don't pay too much attention to it because those guys are making small potatoes in the grand scheme of things, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole we were talking about Star Trek as well the other day, where you can create a derivative work that is less than 30, was it 30 minutes long?
15
and it's
minutes.
okay. 15 minutes long and it's okay, but don't go over that or Paramount might come along and sue you. So there are all kinds of weird little arbitrary rules like that about, those types of things being copyrighted. Movie industry might be a little bit more similar to the music industry where it's like, oh, well, we own this. But I still don't know if they have those same kinds of rights agencies as music does. Music, like copyright, is just a shit show of not the right people being paid. Hard stop. And because I think a lot of people are under the false impression when they first get started that these agencies are actually there to help you, because maybe originally they were, that everyone buys in, and by the time you figure out they're not helping you, you've already basically signed over stuff to them, and getting back out of those contracts is hard. Like, back out of your contract with ASCAP and see how that goes for you.
Well, and even to kind of dive deeper into the mafia metaphor that you brought up, right? Like, the people you pay to protect you from the racket with the music business stuff is the music business people, and you better pay us this money so that we can protect your music for you. But they're kind of the ones making the problem in the first place.
Yeah. And I was reading a little bit on the history today, which has gotten sort of turned around over the years. Like, I always thought from the very beginning they were sort of mafioso, but really they became that way kind of as a result of so much pushback from venues not wanting to pay them. So they rightfully were trying to get money, but all these bar owners were like basically beating up the guys they sent to say, oh, you played so-and-so's tune. So it got to where like nobody wanted to go have that job to say, I want to help protect the artist by writing down all the songs that got played at the restaurant that night because I got busted in the head. And same thing with band members being told they can't play certain tunes. Actually the entire genre of bebop probably happened because of copyright issues, where they would want to play popular tunes and the bands weren't necessarily, they would all know a song and they would just create a new melody for it so that they could play it and not have to have as many rehearsals, or not have, they could do something quickly on the fly on stage and just improvise a melody. And then later on, that might become a song in and of itself. But they're all like, do you know this song? Oh, yeah, I know it. Well, you guys play the chord progression and I'll make up a new melody, and then we don't have to pay anybody for it. That's a whole, it's contrafacts. That's a whole thing, in music in general. So it's just been done very poorly. It needs a reboot. But this particular type of AI generation, I think, is going to suffer tremendously because of those precedences already being set, compared to me writing a book with AI, or compared to me generating an image that uses AI, where I don't think those particular types of arts think about it in the same way. I think they more or less are thinking about it as in, oh my gosh, as a graphic designer, there might be less work because a person who doesn't know how to draw now can go create pretty decent looking drawings by prompting, So again, the individual person who wasn't making that much money to begin with is the person sweating in these scenarios.
Which goes back to that question of what is the best outcome for creators? I mean, there's two sides of it. I told you mine already, which is using AI to supplement creative work is one side, right? There's the other side of it that maybe you are an artist already and you see people misusing it. What would be the right middle ground?
Well, what counts as misuse? I feel like you need to define that first.
Well, the Scarlett Johansson example was one. I know there's the argument that UMG will make is that people are creating what they called AI slop, right? Music that sounds like artists that are in their library. Or as some others would say, there's one famous guy, by the way. I remember a very recent example. It was Dustin Ballard. That's him. He's the guy who made the channel There I Ruined It. And he did a TED Talk, and he talked about his approach on it, but he did cover at a very high level, his opinion on what constitutes a difference between an artist using AI versus someone just randomly using it. Like I said, he had his opinion. It kind of sounds like a little bit of what we're talking about here would actually align with that. I mean, what he revealed, by the way, just in case people haven't seen it, people think that the There I Ruined It channel is just all AI generated stuff, but he showed how he would take his voice and then he would ask AI to change his voice in a way, right, to the way it sounded on the actual videos he was making, or that he would play a tune because he's a violinist. He would play a tune and then he would ask AI to improve it or add more accompanying parts. And that was his approach to it. So is that considered a good use of AI? I mean, as a musician himself, enhancing his own music through AI, or that this is taboo, it's bad for the entire industry, and so we shouldn't do it. And I think from his perspective, if I had to guess, I'd say he probably supports the use of AI because that's what made his channel what it is today. He's got a very successful channel going. But then there's going to be just as many people that he's pretending to be. I mean, the reason he got in the news in the first place was one of his songs, I think it was the Elvis song, was played at a congressional hearing as an example of why AI is dangerous, because he was playing a parody of a song in the voice of Elvis Presley. And so where do you draw the line on that? Like, what's right for all parties involved? Should AI just go away? Should people who are using AI like I am just not be using AI? And should we have to go back to the old method of reaching out to artists? Or are we at a point where that's okay? And, maybe some of the ones out there, the famous people out there that that some people are making songs to mimic, right? And that they just need to realize this is the reality of it. What do they say? Mimicry is the greatest form of flattery. I don't remember how the phrase goes, but effectively, when we play music in karaoke, I mean, we're literally playing someone else's music and we're pretending to be them, right? Really, is that it? I guess what's the difference between that and AI? Obviously, aside from the production quality that you might get from an AI generated voice.
In the case of what you just said, those recordings are copyrighted, and they've probably, like, if you have a reputable karaoke agency, then you've paid to record those songs, so you've paid the original composer, or if they're the literal soundtrack, you've probably paid for the rights to use the background tracks to the actual real song. And then the DJ that plays those has to also pay ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and all those usage places. If not the DJ, the venue, because generally speaking, the venue gets stuck having to pay stuff like that. So those venues have to pay the same performance fees that like my venue would have to pay for legit musicians to sing those songs. It doesn't matter how well the performance is put on. It's just that it happens. So I think those things are covered by basic copyright. But your example of the There I Ruined It guy, I think falls under satire and parody for the same reason that Weird Al Yankovic can record Beat It as with completely different words and basically remake the video as a fat guy. That's parody. He generally goes and asks the artist first if it's okay, though. But he has the right to do stuff like that because of parody laws. And that he's just really cool about it and makes sure that people are okay. Most people want to be parodied by that guy because it makes their own song even more popular and they think it's great. There are rules in place for being able to make fun of something or to write a news report about something or things like that. So I think in his case, even though it's a good example of how he's using AI for all your other points, that legally it's all satire. Like he's kind of making fun of the genres of music and putting them together and what would happen if, to me, that's just classic satire. I don't know that it matters that he used AI to create that satire or not. I think that's a great use of it, actually, because this stuff is so funny. Oh my God. I love that channel.
I have the Say My Name song stuck in my head, by the way, all day today. Yeah. So, and what I'm really trying to get at is, so from my point of view, you've got artists who use AI to become artists, right? Or trying to enhance themselves to the point where they feel like they're artists. That's on the one side. Then you have the artists who have made it, right? Who the other people are parodying or using AI to mimic or whatever the lawsuits say they're doing. So, what is the best outcome that works in the best interest of both those parties? What I'm mainly doing is excluding the corporations from the discussion, if you get where I'm going here. And you could even say as a response to this that you believe one of those two shouldn't also apply for this. I mean, that only one of these should benefit, not the corporations, and maybe not like the people who are using AI.
Yeah, I guess my answer may meander, so you can
Best
edit
kind of
as you
answer,
see
man.
fit. I guess I kind of see it as there's always going to be a few different buckets of people, right? And you're going to have the majority of folks who generally aren't, if they're not themselves creative, they're not even necessarily looking to try and be creative. They just know that there's this popular thing and they kind of want their own take on it, their own iteration. And I can see that being sort of the group of folks who will take an artist's, AI derived voice and try and do a song in their style. Maybe they can't sing like Freddie Mercury and maybe they can't write a song like Freddie Mercury, but they really like that voice, and so they want to do their own version of Queen, right? And to me, that's very. I suppose I'm just going to call it. It's uncreative. To me, that's uncreative, and I don't know what to do about that kind of person. But then you've also got folks who want to make their own stuff, right? And just for whatever reason at the moment, can't write the music themselves, can't play the music themselves, but have enough of an ear and enough of a creative bone in their body to use the AI as a tool, right? For like the stuff that you're doing, the way that I myself tend to use it. And those feel like they're two very different camps. On the one hand, it's kind of that derived work. It's its own kind of creative piece. And I don't see how that's anything other than a completely new piece of art versus kind of the group that I described first, just like, oh, do me something in the style of Queen or in the style of U2 or in the style of Judas Priest. And that's all the thought that goes into it. I don't know. It feels like that's sort of a thing that maybe shouldn't be allowed or kind of sits on the side of the fence where it's so lackluster and so uninteresting that I would almost prefer the tool couldn't do something like that.
Yep.
But I don't know how you draw that distinction between people. How do you decide who is creative enough and trustworthy enough to use the tool versus who isn't? Right? Like, I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that there is one, but it feels like those two goals are completely opposed to each other.
Yep.
Yeah, so I don't know how to.
And
How
maybe
to
that group
adjust
you're
for that.
describing is the one that's right for the walled garden. They do those, make a song in the style of Nicki Minaj, and that's what it does, and that's what sits in the walled garden. And maybe what it is here is Udio and Suno, maybe not. Who knows? Maybe they're basically saying you're no longer our target audience, the creatives. That you guys need to go find somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess I kind of see it though. The idea in general is sort of gatekeeping. Even my own words, like calling it uncreative, saying it shouldn't be a thing, is gatekeeping, and that's sort of the last thing that I actually want to do, right? Because in a way, I feel like every creative person starts out maybe not being creative. Maybe they do start as someone who is just copying what they know, doing something repetitive before they find their own voice. So who am I? Who is anyone to say, like, oh, you can't do that?
Yeah.
Well, that's just a step on the way toward creativity anyway, so I don't know.
I mean, art has always kind of had to stand on its own legs. Like, I I go to a bar and I see somebody cut out a bunch of magazine things and made a really ugly collage. I don't personally think that's art. It's got a $500 price tag on it. If somebody's willing to buy that and hang it on their wall for $500, who am I to stop the artist from doing that, right? Like,
Right.
more power to him or her or them. Great job. I wish I would have cut out some pictures and made that money. I think there's that jealousy thing to it, like the Kenny G scenario where a famous musician went just ballistic in the early days of the internet when Kenny G won like a jazz award, like a jazz Grammy, saying he's not jazz and he didn't work hard, he didn't do this, he didn't transcribe this guy, he didn't learn every John Coltrane solo on guitar, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, he just plays like the pentatonic scale, screw that guy. That's jealousy, man. Like, it didn't change how either of those two musicians played. It didn't change the output of either of those two musicians' art. And it has always been on the people who consume the art to label it. I believe, I'm struggling to remember the exact guitar player who said it. I'll think of it here in a minute. But, it doesn't detract from that person being literally one of the best jazz guitar players to ever walk the face of the planet. Like, he just decided because he didn't get to have the same fame and monetary, buyback, that he should pick on this other guy for making art that's different than his. And I think people who are in a schooled sense oftentimes get taught to demean people who aren't as trained as them because other people like their stuff more. But why wouldn't they like that stuff more? It's more approachable. If something speaks to a person and a computer generated it, who are we to say that that makes it not art? Like, what we're talking about it boils down a lot to compensation and who's making money for it. But if the person who typed 3 words got enjoyment from the thing that came out of it, good for them. Human life is hard. There are a lot of disappointments. Why not just let them create that tool, and let them do whatever they want with it? Like, now, if that thing did actually steal someone else's own creativity, I do think there is a little bit of a wrongness to that. And I don't have a solution for how to fix that problem. But I think the wrongness that is being brought out here isn't actually the artists trying to protect themselves often enough. It's more often mega millionaire companies trying to protect their mega millions and then capitalize off of someone else's work. Oh, well, if Joe Blow goes in there and gives it a pretty decent prompt and lucks out and creates a song that does sound like the next hit of Queen, we can have our artists record that, or we can produce that in some way that's and get it out there, and then we can make the money off of that. And I think that's fundamentally wrong because that group really didn't create anything. They just are looking to bully themselves into a situation and make the most profit off of it possible. Because throughout history, how we do things has changed, and what constitutes like art changes. I'm sure at some point people who paint called people who take pictures not artists and cheaters and all of that. And now photography is considered an art form in and of itself. And painters will try to paint something as accurate as a photograph, while photographers will try to make their photography look like it was drawn, like using Photoshop as a tool, to do that. So I just, the longer I'm alive, the less and less I want to put art into some box, Yeah, I do think there are different levels of quality, and I'm entitled to my opinion to say I believe that's inferior art, but I don't want to prevent someone from making it, right? Sorry, I was just going to say I just think you're roadblocking someone who might become a great artist one day because that was the spark, right? And if they don't become a great artist one day, fine, awesome, just let them spark away.
I would agree. I would even push it further, though, and say that, I think you do also have a totally valid option to say that you don't think something is art, right? Because even that is still just an opinion. If people can be infinitely creative with their own expression with their hands, I don't see why I also can't just have the opinion that a thing isn't art. And you can disagree with me, you can agree with me, and it doesn't really matter, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to change your mind, you're not going to change mine. I don't feel bad about having an opinion. And even if I call something not art, if someone else feels differently, if they're, say, the person that made it, ideally that shouldn't bother them, right? Because people like to just say things. And if you can, kind of like you said before, if someone enjoys it, they should just be able to enjoy it. Who cares what I think of it?
Yep. It's a weird little thing that humans want to do to put stuff in boxes. Just go out and create things. I mean, like at the end of the day, I think the world's better because people want to just go out and create things, and let the chips fall where they may. I hate to be like a tool snob. If I use a 3D printer to print a model versus assembling one myself, am I less of a mini painter? Like no, because I'm painting both of them. If I use a airbrush versus a regular brush, like people will have opinions about that. You don't even have to like what I did. It doesn't matter what kind of art, that I create. You don't have to like it. That's totally fine. Just walk away from it. Someone else might like it. I might be the only person who likes it, but if I got joy from creating it, that's all that really should matter. Like, I've used these AI music generators to do all of those things. I've given it like the stupidest prompt ever and gotten hilarious songs about how my cats like to eat meat that I've just rolled and laughed and shared with people and enjoyed. Would I try to publish those and make money? I mean, honestly, if I were a different personality build, I'd say more power to you. Go do it. Like I couldn't do it because I wouldn't see myself as actually, I would feel like a cheat because of the way I define art for myself. But
Yeah.
I would, but if I'd heard that song on the radio and I found out later it was computer generated, it would not stop me from enjoying it. I would be like, no, that's hilarious. Like it's not going to win any Oscars, but for in my book, but it's still hilarious and I'm getting joy from it, and that's a lot of what I hate that all of those rules will take away from it is the idea that we can't just create something and get that joy. It's just it all goes back to the monetization of it that creates all of the problem. Like I would love to see the little guys be in a position to give it away or make money on it as they see fit, and less of the corporate industry moving in and saying how dare you, you know.
Yeah. The corporate interests in this is the thing that I hate. I agree 100% with what you said. What you may call art may not be what I call art, or vice versa, right? But
Hmm.
it's not my place to judge what you think. Like in the same sense, like I'm into some pretty weird stuff. I mean, I take pictures of boats. It's not everybody's thing, right? But
Hmm.
I enjoy it. I like it, and I see that as art. Other people be like, that's just a picture of nothing. I'll be like, no, it's the greatest thing I've ever received. But the line I hate that is being drawn right now, that I think is being drawn right now, and Udio's just the latest example, is where corporations are trying to tell us what is art and what isn't art. And they're defining the rules. And I think that just takes away from the creativity. It takes away what we as creative humans want it to be, and someone else is defining it for us. Someone who's not even a person, right? It's an entity. It's a company telling us, well, this is art, this isn't art. And if you really look at that at an abstract level, think about like movies, right? Think before Netflix, right? Who defined what was a good movie? Actually, better yet, I mean, who defined what was a good television series to watch? Those were all defined by corporations. They hired people, right, to write it all. But I think Netflix, one of the reasons why they grew the way they did was originally they just had a library of stuff you could watch or stream. And actually, by the way, in the early days, you used to have the CDs that you could just, get whatever you wanted, right? Or the DVDs rather. And my point there is they kind of broke with the norm. And if you watched how the corporations that were kind of owning that industry reacted to it, they absolutely hated Netflix. But they were also
Yep.
stuck because they were the best streaming platform we had at the time, and they used that competitive advantage to their benefit to the point where they started actively competing against them, knowing that the writing was on the wall, that they were going to, these companies like Disney and Paramount, they were going to withdraw their stuff from their platform because they wanted to compete directly with Netflix. And so they started creating their own movies, and that's where they are now. And I look at that and I'm like, all of this removes the human element. And I think in Urge, it was you actually I was talking to about, like, I know we're going off the topic of AI here, but like how movies, I don't think I have seen a creative, unique production in a movie in probably the last 10 years. They all are like rehashes of stuff that's already been done. And I watch them and I'm like, this doesn't look right to me. Like, everything seems to be washed out now. I don't see any bright use of colors. I remember when I watched Lord of the Rings and I was like, that is the brightest green grass I've ever seen. It can't possibly be real. And then I visited New Zealand and said, oh, the grass is actually this color here. Okay, never mind. And I remember that I'll never forget that experience of learning, like, oh yeah, like that was beautiful. And nowadays I go to the theater, I don't see things like that anymore. And in action scenes, even like there's so much happening. It's all close shots and you can't really see what's going on anymore. It doesn't appeal to me.
It's so green screened now that they have to light it in the most neutral way possible. And so then they have to add the lighting post-production, and that just isn't quite the same as actually having an actual set or a real life environment where those things are real. You know, the lighting is real, the wind is real, the clouds in the sky are real, you know.
Yeah, and there's little nuances you'll notice when you watch like something that's not CGI generated. The things in the back, you pick out small things. It's like, that's curious. But yeah, like, and who's making those decisions? I think all of these are being driven from corporate interests, right? It's about making profits out of it, which is why we don't see as much unique stuff like we used to see. And maybe that's just my opinion. I'm misreading the room, but that's how I feel about it. And I feel like, you know, when the AI music scene came out, so much creativity just kind of exploded within a year. Like one of the first ones I think I watched was the guy who posted the country song about glue balloons. Do you know what I'm referring to?
No, I don't, but
I'll have to find that one. But like, it was AI generated. I was like, this is the most hilarious country song I've listened to in probably at least 10 years. And like, there's just a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. Then there's the, There I Ruined It. It came out. And it was just completely different from some of the rehash stuff that I think we had been listening to for so long. Because I remember, we used to take those long drives. Well, okay. So for business, I had to take long drives. And the people I would sometimes go with, they'd bring their music. And they'd be like, why do you not like this song? It would be like one of the pop songs that are kind of popular, and I'd just be like, I can hear the auto-tune in that. And it just turns me off. To me, that doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't do it for me. I mean, it did it fine for the person next to me. And I'm not judging them. But I'm like, that is just how it just felt like everything was exactly the same. I was listening to the same music, maybe to a different beat, or even now, some of the music that my kids play, it's the exact same beat, just with maybe some different words. I don't even think they're listening to the words. They're just using it as background noise, if you will. Right. And I'm like, where did we go wrong where that is what we now consider art? Just, to me, I'm looking for that creative aspect. And I think AI brought it back. And I worry that, UMG could very well be like, actually, we don't want any, like, they say they're going to train it on their own library, right? But if they do it the way they described it, they're going to give all of the artists in there the option of opting into this. And if every single one of them opts out, then what is Udio actually going to be running on? Like, there's no music.
Well, yeah, so
right?
they do plan to also use anything that people generate to continually feed the model. So, copies of copies of copies. I'm sure it'll maintain high quality.
Yeah. Exactly. There you go.
All right, so I think we probably beat this topic to death. It's probably time for us to ask a final parting question before we call it a day.
But obviously, Udio's happened. What do you think is the future of AI music?
Rockstone, I'd like to hear your take on that.
I think the future of AI music is going to be the dystopian hellscape that I described when talking about Adobe and some conglomerate eventually taking control and making it this massively expensive subscription model to pay for the privilege of creating something that you can only listen to that sounds like your favorite artists. And I think that's where it's going to end up.
That is very descriptive and terrifying. In Urge, I ask you the same question.
Well, I really hate being that dark, although I'd I don't entirely disagree. I do think money buys us everything, in this capitalistic universe that we live in. So there's a very good chance that what Rockstone said is the outcome. But within that, Adobe is still used to create so much beautiful art, right? It's expensive on the part of the artist who has to pay those subscription fees. But I wouldn't want to do without the tool. I have very mixed feelings about companies like Adobe because I really do enjoy using their tools. Like I've tried to use more open things and they just don't have the features. And of course, Adobe bullied their way into that position, and I make no bones about it. I understand it, but at the same time, the output I use every day. So it probably will become something like that, where as the cost of doing business in music, it's always kind of been a little bit like that, though. I would say that it's been hard to democratize the creation of music because instruments are also very expensive. So if you want to learn to play an instrument, there is a huge cost to just getting your foot in the door. You don't just get to say, I want to play saxophone. You got to go buy one or have someone give one to you. I mean, the odds of you getting one are low. You might not be able to play saxophone because it costs, $3,000 to buy a new one that's shitty, but it costs $500 to buy a student model trumpet, and by virtue of the attributes of their construction, you're probably getting a much better deal with a $500 student model trumpet than you would be getting with like a $1,500 student model saxophone, because saxophone is complicated to construct. So you might not get to play saxophone because of a cost limitation, so you were forced to play trumpet. Or maybe your band only had a baritone as something you could have for free, as a student who couldn't afford to rent something themselves. And so you had to become that instrumentalist. And so there's already a cost and barrier to entry. Why are so many people guitar players? Because it's so much cheaper than so many other instruments, and it's self-accompanying. So you can sing and play it and you can do those things. So, music has always come with a very high cost to enter the market. This will become another instrument that has a cost to market. That subscription model will probably continue forward because that's just the nature of software today. And I think you'll see that tool start to transition from everybody just kind of generating whatever the hell they want to it being more like what Suno has, where you get in there and you give it an idea and it starts generating, parts along with you. Your synthesizer analogy was a good one, I think. In the 80s, horn players especially hated synthesizers because they replaced us. You could get a horn section that one keyboard player could play it instead of paying 5 people to play an entire horn section on a pop tune. You could pay one guy to play it on synthesizer and thus saving that much money. It all kind of came back around where people decided they liked the authentic sound better, but then computers got better at making the sound, and so now even keyboard players can't get a job because you can just program the computer, to play the whole thing, and it actually sounds like real instruments to some degree. Like Game of Thrones, for instance, like all that beautiful orchestration that everybody loves is just computer-generated sounds. And people who can actually tell the difference get upset by how much people love it. But that didn't stop a bunch of people from making money off of it, or regular people from enjoying listening to it and buying the soundtrack, right? You're going to still have a degree of both, I think, where you're going to have people who want the authentic experience and they'll produce music that way, and then you're going to have a whole genre full of people who are now using AI to create music, along in tandem with what they do. And I think you're also going to have corporations that pay some schmuck to sit in a corner and probably prompt badly until they come up with a great sounding song because it's cheaper than paying 5 composers to come up with songs to give to their sexy pop artist of the week. All of those things are going to happen. It'll just get ingrained into the fabric of how music gets made. It will cease to be fun and cheap and just become, I don't know, there may be fun and cheap versions of it that'll be sold out there, but it'll probably be, like you said, the walled garden where, I can just go do this to piss about my time like I would play a video game. But nothing really would come of it. But then if somebody does create something fun the industry will get to use that to make money off of it themselves because they have set it up in a way that you don't own anything that you create in those places. So, and I use create loosely in that sense.
Yeah.
So you'll just be paid to play.
Yeah. And I'll give my take just to kind of close this out. I'll take the optimistic approach for a second and say, my dream, the way I hope this really comes out of this is
that we find a way to move out of being stuck with just the subscription model.
And that, part of the problem is these platforms, like, by the way, like UMG and these larger corporations are going after other corporations, right? They're going after Udio. I haven't seen any case of them going after the individual people. The only ones who are going after the individuals are like people who are, making AI videos to specifically like mimic somebody, if you will. Like that's outside of the scope of this, right? That's a whole different issue altogether. But like UMG is suing Udio. They're not suing the creators of the music, right? Not yet anyway.
And I see the fear that UMG is just going to take all the music I've ever created on Udio and just own it.
I don't know if they could do that. I feel like that's a long shot. I hope it doesn't happen. Let's put it that way. But what I'm really hoping comes out of this is that, if these companies that are able to create these fantastic models like this could give it to an individual and they could do it on their own time, right? On their own computer, it's a lot more personable. And I'm now training it on if it's learning from my own catalog, right? And I feel like at that level, if they ever get to a point where they say, we're not going to do subscriptions, but you're going to have to pay, I don't know, pay $1,000 and you can download it, right? And run it on your own machine, do whatever, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is that they have, there'll be people who will absolutely throw a stink about that. If you're using like the professional version of this software, you're probably paying a couple $100 at least a year, right? And maybe $1,000 was a bit much, but hey, Adobe.
I mean, that's what their fees are like, right? So,
but all of that work, then it becomes a tool that you're using on your own computer versus using it
through like a subscription service.
Well, I mean, that'll be my wishful thinking side of it, where then I can do it all in my own creative area and nobody knows what I'm making, right? Like I don't have to fear that UMG is going to go and fingerprint every single song ever made in Udio. And as a result, I'm going to lose, or I'm going to get copyright strikes, which I know is a fear that a lot of the current, users of Udio are dealing with, especially those who are using it in that context. The paid people, which I'm assuming if you're Udio or if you're the future Udio who's partnered with UMG,
you probably care more about the people who are paying for your service than those who are not paying for your service, just saying.
At least you should be. And I think the people who are paying for it took that extra step to say, hey, I'm beyond just like entering a single prompt and creating this. But, that walled garden approach, I think, works well for that group of non-paying users today because, or what they would refer to as the AI slop, I guess. But that's because they are using, the people who are doing that are using it for the purpose of, that I want to mimic, my favorite artist to make a song that sounds like it. And I feel like Udio has shifted the market and has left, the creative types. And I use the air quotes, creative types, because I don't know how to define that exactly. I don't think anybody knows how to define that group exactly. But they feel like they got left in the dark on this. Some other company will eventually figure this out. I think that Udio did the AI music genre, market segment no favors by how much by their approach. We didn't talk about it, but I felt getting 1,000 credits to use that I could literally never use because if I did, I'd have to honor the new terms of service and therefore wipe out any ability to use any of my songs by just using them. An absolute slap in the face. I can't believe their marketing team thought that would be a good idea, but it happened, right? And so this is going to be this dark shadow over the industry, probably for a year. And then Udio will most likely either just disappear or reform itself under the UMG label. And then by then, everybody who's currently stuck with nothing will figure out where they're going to go. And I mean, they've got options. I mean, there are a couple out there, like anything though, it's a learning experience. You got to figure out how to use it. And I think that's where a lot of people are who are complaining about it right now is it's just something new. Like people who are moving from Udio to Suno complain that it doesn't have the same quality. Well, that's because I remember it took me months before I figured out and tweaked the prompts to the point where it was getting me the quality I was expecting. So it's a step backwards, but you'll get there. And I do think there are other options out there. It's just everybody's going to have to figure out what's right for them.
Yep. It's a weird world we live in, man.
I know.
That's like my final thoughts on that, because there are so many angles to look at it. Like it, I feel like anybody who's learned to do something the hard way will always hate the person who comes in after them and gets to do it the easy way. They want them to also have had to do it the hard way. That's some weird human nature thing we have. I have tried to overcome that way of thinking, but it takes effort on my part to not hate DJs when I go to weddings, for instance, because in the 90s, DJs put a lot of bands out of business, by not doing anything other than like playing, like programming a song list into their computer and hitting play. I mean, it wasn't even like DJs on radio stations where they actually had to like write down the songs they play and drop the needle. I mean, it became this whole thing of like, and then the same thing in the 2000s when the iPod came out and it put all the DJs out of business because people could just plug in their set list from their iPod and just play music, and skirt the entire system that way because, like the idea that like there's always going to be that creative struggle where people are raging against the next new tool. Like I wonder if back in the day trumpet players were angry at church organs. I don't know. Like
could have been.
Maybe. I'm sure it's probably still a thing.
I remember when electric guitar wasn't considered country music.
There's always going to be haters out there. I really wish that this copyright and fair use thing, I wish I could believe it was actually happening to protect those artists. But I don't think that's really why it's happening. I think the almighty dollar is why it's happening. And that those artists weren't going to make any money off the stuff, like, I don't think their monetary situation would change one iota from what you were doing with Udio.
Yeah, right.
There was no plus or minus there at all, even if you'd created a tune that sounded just like the Beatles. Like they weren't making that money off of you one way or the other. So what's the harm in it?
All right. Well, this was a great discussion. I appreciate your time today. And
thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And definitely looking forward to having some more on this discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more to discuss. And because we scratched the surface, we really talked about AI and music, but we've hit a lot of other areas that are tangentially related to it. But I appreciate your time today, and I think looking forward to the next discussion.
Yeah, sounds great. Have a great rest of your evening, Sprite Monkey, and
same to you, Interurge. Same to you, Rockstone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yep. See you later, guys.
See ya.